there in the Honors College for several years, and climate has been a regular topic of discussion at our supper tables. So I now present my husband, David Petering.
Just to recall for all of you why we're here talking about climate change. Since about 1960, the temperature of the planet has just been increasing. This is a scale of change in temperature. And we're now up to about 1.4 degrees centigrade over what we were back in this period of time prior to 1960 and so forth. So we know that greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide, are responsible for this increase. And you can just see here how carbon dioxide has increased in the atmosphere in parallel with what's happening to temperature. These things go together, if you will. And we also know that we've gotten to the point where we're having widespread, really severe problems relating to this increase in global temperature. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change of the United Nations says we should not go above 1.5 degrees Celsius. Okay, because then we get into a range where we're just going to have devastating global problems. All right, so they thought we were going to get to 1.5 degrees Celsius between 2030 and 2050, but actually we're almost there right now in 2025. So the other issue is carbon dioxide it just accumulates. It takes so long in terms of its natural cycle of turnover to change, to get back to a normal level will take centuries if we stop increasing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere at the present time. So we need to get to this so-called net zero carbon emissions as fast as possible. Now we're going to transition to what's going on locally, and I'm going to look at what We Energy's plan is to get to net zero carbon emissions. And they started out in 2005 and just arbitrarily called that the baseline amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. In 2005, they were basically burning coal, and they were also using some nuclear, if you will. Then between 2005 and 2023, they've largely been transitioning from coal to natural gas. Now, natural gas is about twice as efficient in providing energy as coal. And so they have managed, without doing anything with respect to renewable energy, to reduce their carbon dioxide emissions by about 50%, which is very good. Now, the idea is over the next several years, they're going to reduce this to 80% by, again, getting rid of coal, but now starting to transition to renewables, basically solar and wind energy, if you will. So you want to take a look at this plan with respect to 2023 to 2030. And this is from their corporate responsibility report. It's their last report about what they're doing. And this is the 2023 sort of percentage of the various forms of energy: coal, natural gas, there is some nuclear, and renewables. Very few renewables, if you will. By 2030, this is going to change such that almost all the coal is going to be gone from its sources of energy, if you will. And this is going to be replaced largely by renewables, a little bit increase of natural gas, if you will. So this is what is actually planned: 3,800 megawatts, that's a power unit, megawatts of renewable is going to replace 4,600 megawatts of coal, as long as we also add a little natural gas to this as well. Okay, so that's the plan. Okay, now here is the wicked twist. If you look at the Public Service Commission request from Wisconsin Electric, which some of you may have been involved in sort of giving responses to with respect to the fact that this was going to be an addition of a combustion turbine, gas turbine, so it was going to increase the amount of carbon dioxide and also other pollutants in the atmosphere. Hidden in there, if you will, or at least it's back a ways and it's never really highlighted, is a different view of what their idea of going from 2023 to 2030 was. Instead of simply having a constant amount of total energy that you're dealing with and just changing the composition of the energy forms, now there's an additional large increase in the amount of power demand, which is shown in this point down at the bottom. And if you read, and they don't talk about data centers at all, they just say, well, there's going to be an increase in demand in the I-43 corridor. Well, these are data centers that are going to cause this demand, if you will. Okay, so what are data centers? Well, this is my little cartoon of a data center here. And here's the data center, and it's housing all sorts of computers that have housed on them, let's say, computer programs like ChatGPT. Okay, these are called large language models, and they're very energy intensive because they're basically language models. You can communicate with them on the basis of language, if you will. Now, the idea is this is a commercial venture. They want to maximize profit. How do you maximize profit? You maximize users. Okay, already there are 130 million adults using AI, artificial intelligence, of things like this, in the United States. Now you think about this on a worldwide basis. So each one of those has a certain energy demand associated with every use. You put those all together, it's an enormous new energy demand placed on the grid, either locally or nationally, however you want to think about that. All right, now let's take a look at what's actually going on. Now we're going to focus on the I-43 corridor, but there is another data center that's going to go up in Beaver Dam. So there's one in Port Washington. You've heard about the Microsoft one in Mount Pleasant. They're planning another one in Kenosha, if you will. So how much power do they demand? Well, the one that is starting to be built and has been discussed mostly is the one in Mount Pleasant, 450 megawatts. Well, 450 megawatts, what is that power? It powers on a daily basis the city of Madison. What? One data center? The whole city of Madison? Now you begin to get the idea of what this means for the future in terms of power needs. So, but the one up in Port Washington is huge by comparison even. 3,500 megawatts. Well, let's turn that into another term here. That's 2.8 million homes. That's equivalent to the energy necessary on an average of 2.8 million homes. Think of it another way. There are 2.8 million homes in Wisconsin. Okay, one data center equivalent to the power necessary for all the homes in Wisconsin. That gives you a sense of what we're talking about here. All right, so in terms of, well, we got to provide the power, We Energy says, or maybe the Public Service Commission says, or whatever. What kind of power will that be? Will it be renewable? Will it be natural gas, or what? There's a lot of equivocation on this, and we don't really know about the Microsoft site. As far as the one up in Port Washington is concerned, they've only said in stage one, it'll be about 35% renewable. That means 65% natural gas. Okay, now I just am going to assume that all of these are going to have about 35%. What can you say at the present time? All right, let's go back to what we've seen before. Here's the model. Here's the period in which these data centers are being built. Okay, Here's what the original intent was, based upon no change in the total amount of energy necessary to meet demand. Here's what's going to happen. We add 2,700 megawatts of non-renewable natural gas generation, 1,400 megawatts of renewable. So you're nearly doubling the total amount of power during this period of time. You got to think about all these things, logistics, how you're going to manage this, and so forth. And it looks like a significant amount of that is going to be non-renewable. In other words, we're going to be adding carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. So that's not good. All right? Now, this was, of course, the original path to get down to 80% reduction. What happens if you follow this pathway? You only get to about 72% reduction. Okay, and that's a 31% failure in terms of meeting the goal of 80%. Okay, so these are the sorts of issues, and they're not all sort of lined up with each other, but they all go into this wicked category, if you will. Now here's the thing to put it back in the bigger picture. Here's a sort of historical view of gross domestic product. Okay, sum of all goods and services. It's going up exponentially. It has been. It continues to do that. It can only do that if energy utilization goes up exponentially. Here's the energy curve. All right, now you put that in the context of we got to get to net zero. Well, if we got to net zero back here, you know, we would be in a different place, but we didn't. We could have done it here, but we didn't. Now we're way up here somewhere. Harder and harder and harder to reach that goal, because remember, it's not that easy to make this total transition from fossil fuels to renewables. And in this period of time, data centers are at the heart of the problem. Okay, there's a report out from Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory that says total energy demand is going to go up 20% over the next 5 years, let's say. The data center energy demand is going to comprise 20 to 50% of that increase. So you see, they're right at the heart of all of this. All right? So this is just a summary of what we've been saying so far, that this new demand is going to be just enormous. Okay, and we're just kind of, it's not even on our radar screen, if you will. I say, this goes into your advocacy things. The first thing that has to be done, really, is to get this under the purview of a public service commission that actually does consider climate change as a primary concern. Okay, until that happens, they're just going to keep approving things as they come along. There are some other ones here, oversight of AI development. Another very important one is, as usual, the United States is not very efficient. China actually has a large language model that uses only about 10% of the energy that the ones that commercial AI in this country use. So there are all these options that we have to consider in this wicked problem of climate change and data centers. Thank you.
Another reporter, I met her in journalism school, and she became an environmental reporter who wrote about climate change and the Grandin Mine and the Fox River cleanup and all that good stuff. So I could see these worlds were converging, and then they did. So here's some information. There's also a notebook to sign up for updates from us. I just wanted to get that up there right away. And then, so what does all this mean? David provided a lot of the context, so I can run through some of these. But the bottom line is there could be an impact on prices just on how things are structured by the Public Service Commission. And you know, the Microsoft site in Racine County already benefited from some of the infrastructure that went in for Foxconn. Because that is on the Foxconn site, and so there were some transmission lines that we're already paying for that were built for that. Before I get too far down the road, I gotta explain what CUB is. So CUB is the consumer advocate for Wisconsin's residential and small business customers, those 2.8 million households. And so we're a nonprofit, nonpartisan nonprofit. We were actually formed back in the days of Ralph Nader. Ralph Nader had a vision. He saw that after dealing with the car and auto industry and seatbelts and safety, he looked and saw a wave of nuclear plants coming, and he saw that there wasn't balance. I'm going to talk a lot about balance. There wasn't balance between who was making at the Public Service Commission, who was actually making the decisions in terms of balance between the residential customers were not represented. Industry had a voice there to keep their rates low, and certainly the utilities have always had a voice there because they're the ones asking for permission to raise prices. So we have a small team of experts. We have a staff of 6. We have 4 so it's still David versus Goliath. But we tap experts to basically advocate on behalf of residential and small business customers. Back in the day when this was going through the legislature, Wisconsin was the first state in the country to take up Ralph Nader's vision and implement it. And Jim Wayner was saying that, just talking about how outflanked the residential customers is by all the wave of experts, economists, attorneys that the utilities can bring to the cases. It's still not, still kind of not as balanced as it could be. So a quick look at how states do this. Most states have a state government agency, like a part of the Attorney General's office. Some people call it an Office of People's Counsel. Wisconsin, Louisiana, and Oregon are the only states that just rely on a nonprofit and no state agency to do this work. And we're surrounded by some green states. You can see that those states have a CUB or a nonprofit and state government agencies working on for the public interest in the customer's behalf. So just wanted to give you that perspective. We do represent small business and residential customers, and our primary area of focus is at the Public Service Commission in the cases. So every year, every other year, We Energies files a rate case, but there are 4 other big utilities. So every year, we're involved in rate cases involving the 5 big utilities. We don't show up in every case, but when there are big cases, we're there in terms of new power plants, new power lines. Are they, the fundamental questions is this needed, and is this the most economical solution for the customers? Utilities want to build a lot because the way they make their money is to build. They build, the more they build, the more they earn. And so we want to be in those cases too, so they don't build too much, as could be happening right now. And then we are also involved in some fairness and consumer protection cases, including these data center tariff cases that are coming up soon. So right now, there are 3 rate cases underway involving the non-We Energies. So it's kind of the eastern half in this state was last year's cases with We Energies and WPS in Green Bay, and this year we've got everybody else in for rate hikes. So this gives you some painful numbers that show that We Energies prices over the last, just going into this, just what was approved that last year for residential customers is at about 11% increase over the next 2 years. And then if you take the prior increase, our bills as residential customers, typical residential customers, are going up by about 1/3. And this is this is information we pointed out in the rate case that We Energies has, or the state has been giving out some of the highest profits in the country, so 5th highest. And then if you look, this shows the We Energy stock price relative to the typical utility. So they not only outperform the S&P 500, and they outperform the typical utility, they outperform the S&P 500, and this is a monopoly. And then customers, since going way back, have seen bills more than double And if they'd only been kept to inflation, they'd be right around here. So far more than inflation. And as a statewide average, then there's a ranking from the Department of Energy that comes out every year. And it shows we're the 13th highest in the Midwest. And a separate ranking that I just got recently shows that We Energies has moved up to the 3rd highest prices in the Midwest. It's across about 11 states. So it's not all bad. The prices are going way up, but the savings actually have come up too, in part because the savings, the utilities keep asking for far too much money. Recent cases, just in the last year's cases, CUB was able to save over $300 million and help save that through the decisions of the Public Service Commission that actually brought down the size of increases. And then in the recent years, we've had some success at bringing down the profit rates of utilities which is a key area that I was just showing with we're the 5th highest in the country. It's still higher than the national average, but it's starting to come down a little. We think they should have gone much further because the utilities are still earning much more than they actually need to run their business. And then one of the things we've been active in recent years is trying to, and as part of my guilt over leaving the newspaper profession, is working with the media and trying to get people involved in these issues. The utilities win when they speak in jargon and they use acronyms and they put it in terms that nobody can understand. And so kind of one of my goals is try to just use plain talk to kind of help people figure out what the heck's going on. Move on to the next thing. So why are our rates so high? I mentioned the build mentality. They're so focused on the supply side. And we have some fundamental structural problems that enable that. Wisconsin actually has an energy priorities law on the books that states that there's a preference for energy efficiency, demand response, renewables at the top end, and going down, and then it goes down from there. We're not doing enough in that area. The profits are too high. I think I said that. That's kind of a theme for me. And there's not enough attention being paid to the affordability crisis. There's a national group called Power Lines that just came out with a poll this last month that talked about rising utility prices and the fact that people are upset across the country. And I think we're at a tipping point where I think this is going to lead to more people just not taking it anymore, if you will. And we saw that we talked about this in the rate case last year. We saw that in the election results. We have this haves and have-nots economy. There's a new book out called because it's gotten so, the income disparity's gotten so extreme now, there's a new book called The Haves and the Have-Yachts. I haven't read it yet, I just saw an interview about it. I think it's gonna be on my list. But the rate inflation and the price inflation is really hitting people who are struggling the most. And then what happens, the federal government laid off all the employees that are responsible to provide energy assistance around the country to low-income people. And it's not in the current bill that Congress is debating, but in the proposed budget for 2020, for the next federal fiscal year, they would take $4 billion of energy assistance and turn that into $0. So that's hopefully there's been bipartisan support for energy assistance in the past, but it just shows the impact on folks that where this affordability crisis is real. Back to data centers. So we've had periods of big energy demand growth in the past, and then in part because of efficiency. You look at complex fluorescent light bulbs and LED light bulbs, which LEDs use 1/10 of the energy or less of an old incandescent bulb. So that, the economy was able to grow as David was showing, but energy demand did not. But now we're seeing some increases. But the question is, how big is the increase? This is just so much hype, so much fever right now about these issues. I've been using the term irrational exuberance that people may remember from back in the day, because I think there's just so much hype with the fervor to race to build data centers and the AI race. And the challenge is if you look around the country and in Wisconsin, there are forecasts that show data center growth is going like this, right? But how much of that is double counting or triple counting or quadruple counting? There's a utility CEO who was at a forum in New York, and he said, we don't know what's real. He said, we don't know what's going to be built here or around the country. And that's one of the reasons we brought skepticism and said, do you really need is Microsoft pausing construction? Do they really need, yes, they announced they're pausing construction. Do they need all this? So here, this shows some of the differences. This was a slide from a conference we were at just last week, where they showed that there could be it could be this high, but actually I've seen a different proposal that showed even though it could be this much, which is about 150 of the Oak Creek gas plants that were just built, but in terms of the double counting and the triple counting and the quad, it could be a lot lower. And that's a big question, is what's real in all this. Data centers are coming to Wisconsin, but there are other big energy use factories, including the EV factories and the battery factories that are also coming around the country. This is a really technical slide that I liked, but I'm not going to talk about it. I'm going to say when you do a Google search now, if you don't reset it, it's automatically going to give you an AI search. Yeah. And we were at this conference last week, and I was looking for a restaurant, and all of a sudden Google's AI tool, I was looking for Indian food. And Google's AI tool asked me if I wanted Southern Indian or Northern Indian. I was like, I wasn't asking that question, but because it was using its AI provision, it was using 8 times as much energy, 8 to 10 times as much energy as a regular Google search. And so that's the challenge we're in. I didn't ask for that AI to be used, but it's pervasive. So Wisconsin's not alone in seeing data center interest. Virginia outside Washington, D.C. has kind of been ground zero for data centers, but Ohio is seeing it. A lot of states are seeing it, but we're certain that we have a state that gave tax abatements for data centers, and so we're in this race. And it's the economic development value of AI and data centers is something that some people are asking about, given that they don't create a lot of jobs, but they do help with tax base. So I talked about that uncertainty, and there's just so much that the utilities themselves don't know. Are they coming here? Or are they coming somewhere else? I heard one tech person say, or insider say, that if company A, let's call them Amazon, decides to announce a project, then in a certain state, a bunch of the other big companies might just announce a project right in that same area just to gum up the works for the first one. So they have these things. The tech companies are so rich that their capital spending budgets are in the tens of billions per year, and so to spend $1 million just to mess up the other guy's site selection is not a big deal. So I think David had better slides that showed where these are going, so I'm going to flip through that. But I want to underscore what he said. So it's possible the Microsoft, he said 450 megawatts for Microsoft. It's possible that one could be bigger as Microsoft, if they do go to their phases, their second phase and third phase, and depending on how big it is in either Racine or Kenosha. But then if you take that plus the big one in Port Washington, which for perspective, the largest We Energies customer today is 100 megawatts. And so that's, and a data center of 500 megawatts is 5 times as big. But think of the one in Port Washington being as much as 3 to 3.5 gigawatts, so 3,000 megawatts. So We Energies is only a 5,000 megawatt system, so you're really doubling the size of We Energies for 2 or 3 sites. So where is all this playing out? Obviously it's playing out in the natural gas plant cases that were just voted on at the PSC. A lot of groups were involved in, including CUB, including Walnut Way. Antonio's going to be speaking next, and others. These power plant projects were approved despite the questions that we raised, and among the questions we raised were that they had not properly valued energy efficiency, demand response, and battery storage, and we thought that the whole process was wrong because they should have had this tariff issue decided before they came in for all these new power plants. So it's playing out at the PSC, so that there's the new power plants. There's also a whole nother thing that could add to bills in the years ahead, which is new power lines, which interstate power lines, and I think there's this proposal to build what's called 765. So right now the largest power line in this state is, think of it as a six lane highway, is a 345 kilovolt line. And that's all we have in Wisconsin. But if you go down to across the turnpike from Illinois east, there are some really giant towers down there, some power lines. And those are like 12 lane highways. And now, for the first time ever, those are going to be proposed for Wisconsin. So I think part of that is driven by demand for data centers. And kind of I'm concerned that there's a build it and they will come kind of fever aspect of what's going on in terms of the fever that's going on. So I'm going to move on to, so the fundamental question in all this is who pays. And you've heard, if you've read the comments from the Microsoft or from the utility, We Energies, it's, Microsoft, we're committed to paying our fair share. Or we can accommodate data centers without raising prices for everyone else. Well, then I guess my work's done, right? But the devil's in the details, and so basically they have to codify that. And so the lawyers for Microsoft and We Energies were negotiating a deal for a very long time that finally got proposed in March or April, and so that's this. These are the 6630 TE113. This is how the PIC identifies its cases. But basically, they have a proposal that basically outlines how they're going to treat very large customers. And there's a lot of good language in there about protecting other customers. So, but we still have to dig into it and see what's legit and what assumptions they might be using that are not protective enough. And the concern that we have is there's just so many challenges that could be coming at customers in terms of them not paying their fair share. Essentially, with this fever pitch and the fever, business plans change so fast in tech. Look at 2 years ago we weren't talking about data centers, and now it's all we're talking about. And that's just 2 years. What's going to be like 5 years from now? And David mentioned the DeepSeek announcement from China. If you can use 10% of the energy to process to do generative AI, then are you going to need all this stuff? And the challenge with that is in the utility world, you pay for power plants over 40 to 50 years. And so that's why exit fees are important, and if they do exit, holding the tech companies accountable so that if they leave after 10 years, that the rest of us aren't stuck paying for that for something that was only built. It wouldn't have been built if it weren't for if it wouldn't have been built if their project weren't on the table. And so, and then I mentioned the transmission line, the Foxconn example. There's concerns about how transmission costs, power line costs are going to be accounted for in all this, and whether that's gonna be. And then just the fact is that because of all this demand, you're seeing actually a surge in prices. We're in a wholesale energy market that nobody really understands or knows about. And when I tried to write about it at the Journal Sentinel, my editor said, please don't write about that. So as a result, you don't know about it. But there's this wholesale energy market. It's so confusing. But essentially, on the wholesale level, you're seeing prices come up. So part of the system, on the days we do import power, we're seeing higher prices already, both here and in the east and in the East Coast, where there are a lot of data centers already. And so one of the questions that needs to be had is, what should we be requiring of data centers before they show up? What should they be doing in terms of generating their own power? What should they be doing in terms of enabling or requiring them to power down on hot summer days when the system is struggling? Because we care about affordability, but we don't want the lights to go off either. The typical utility customer around the country doesn't really think much about these things. This group is thinking more than the typical person, because you're thinking about the planetary impact of energy. But around the country, they say that people think about their utility bill for 10 minutes a year. And that's when they see a bill that they build that they're going to gripe about, or they turn the light switch on and nothing happens. So we need more attention in this area. So this comes to some of what we'd like to see going forward at the state. So we're at this point where the utilities are kind of controlling the narrative too much. They are controlling the narrative too much, and they have. We Energies has controlled the narrative for a long time, and we need to take back the narrative. We want to be on a path to the energy future that we want, and right now we're in this reactive mode where there's no plan. There's no plan for the utilities have their plan, and in this fall, during an investor presentation, is when, if I listen to the We Energies conference call, I'll find out exactly how much power, new power they say they'll provide or want to build to serve that new Port Washington site. But should we have to wait for an investor presentation to find out what the plan is for the state? And so we're at this point where our Public Service Commission doesn't have the tools it needs to regulate the utilities. In fact, most states have a process in place called integrated resource planning. Love that jargon, but it's basically the utility files a plan for the next 10 years, 7 to 10 years, and then the PSC analyzes the plan. Right now, everything is siloed. So there were 2 natural gas plant cases, and we had to do all our work in one case, and raise all the issues about the utilities' big long-term plan in that case, and then we had to go to the second case, and we had to say, we're going to raise all these concerns again, and so right now everything is so siloed and there's no. I talked about balance. There's no balance right now because it's so focused on the utilities' supply, interest in supply, and when a state like Minnesota or any of these dark blue states, when Xcel Energy in Minnesota comes in for its long-range plan, the regulators and the groups like ours get involved, and they say, you know, you may need 5,000 megawatts over the next 10 years. You should get 1,500 of that through aggressive energy efficiency, smart thermostats in every home, ability for everybody to power down their home energy use on a hot summer day. Maybe even programs to add batteries to homes, and definitely more in the area of demand response. We can't choose energy efficiency and demand response because that's never on the table. And so that's why planning is so important. And right now we're just kind of driving down the highway with no GPS. And so that's why the next thing we need to do is really get the legislature. We think that PSC, because of the orders of magnitude difference in the energy demand, we think the PSC on its own could require the utilities to submit these plans for approval. We'd probably end up in court on that one, but we'll see. But the other path is the legislature. And as I said, you know, look at all these states that have done it. And so, and the other thing that's rumbling up is just whether, and this is happening around the country, where states like Oregon and Colorado are actually passing data center bills with the consumer in mind. So there's one group of states that's moving fast to attract data centers, and there's another group of states that's saying, time out. You know, they're saying, wait, let's hold. There's this need for speed, but let's not rush so fast that we don't remember fundamental things about how we regulate utilities and how we think about the impact on the rest of the customer base. Almost there. So, what can you do? What can I do? So, on this, and some of this is on the back of your agenda too, but we want people to think about calling your state reps and senators, specifically on making sure that these tech companies are paying their fair share, that the I's are dotted and that the T's are crossed on this stuff. Customers, the rest of the customers shouldn't be left holding the bag. And then later on, those two cases, one for Beaver Dam, that's the Alliant one, that's going to be a Facebook Meta project. And then for We Energies, they're going to be this tariff case. And so we'll have updates when there's a public comment process opportunity available. There's still, these cases are still getting going as we speak. But at that point, it would be great to have customers weigh in and say, and with their own thoughts and using their own voice. And then the legislature needs to know that we want a better planning process for the state. I know David, I don't know if I've got Roger on the bridge. David mentioned the idea of being able to use set carbon, take carbon into account and account for carbon, which have more of a full cost accounting in regulation. And we're seeing states that do that, but they are the blue states. So it's Maryland, Massachusetts, California, other states like that, where they actually are empowering their PSCs to not just think about what since monopoly regulation was founded by Fighting Bob LaFollette here in Wisconsin of the utilities, it's been about safe, reliable, affordable, and allowing the utilities to earn a return because you're giving them this monopoly. But the challenge is that in recent years, those blue states have added safe, reliable, affordable, decarbonized, and several states are actually adding equity as something that the PSC, the Public Service Commissions, need to consider. I believe that includes Massachusetts and Maryland as well. And that's it for me for now.
Antonio grew up in the Walnut Way location, where he now serves as executive director of Walnut Way, and has been a very active individual working in cooperation with other groups in the city and elsewhere. Please, yes, thank you.
So much. Hey, good morning, everyone.
Good morning.
Very, very happy to be here. Really appreciate it. I'm Antonio Butts, Executive Director at Walnut Way Conservation Corporation. Walnut Way is a community-based organization. Historically, it's place-based. So we've been around for about 25 years. The heart of our work is, the vision for our work is to eliminate the barriers to wellness, work, and wealth. But our mission is to create an economically diverse community, sustain transformation through traditional community engagement, environmental stewardship, and economic development. The hallmark of the organization is that it's resident-led. So the board is resident-led. We have a few other entities in the neighborhood that are all resident-led. And so for us, what's important, similar to I imagine you all, that all of our projects, programs, and initiatives have residents at the center of them. They're leading the work. And so essentially what we have is a situation where residents are leveraging the infrastructure of the organization to see their goals and aspirations through. So over the course of our history, what we've tried to do basically is deal with, the environmental impacts, the quality of the housing, the quality of the air, nutrition, all of these basic things that we all know about that's taking place and that we all have to deal with. And so some of the early initiatives were just turning vacant lots and beautifying them, right? Planting tulips or rehabbing tax foreclosure properties to create better housing in the area, different things like that. Starting small social enterprises like landscaping and stormwater management companies to create jobs for folks who have hard times with employment, and partnering with the municipality to do that. So what we try to do is turn the problems into opportunities, a lot of times economic opportunities. In the last 5 years of the organization, because of all of the place-based work we have been doing and our reach was getting broader, we were trying to figure out, what do we do now beyond the neighborhood? And so, again, historically, all of the work was really direct service. You knock on the door, you need A, B, C, X, Y, Z. But we knew as well that we weren't doing anything on the systems change, the systemic side of all of this work. So we had partners across the country who we have been doing all of this environmental stewardship work with. And one of our partners down south, small organization, was an intervener in a utility rate case in Georgia. This was probably about 5 years ago. And so when we were visiting, we saw them doing this advocacy work at the state level. And we were like, as soon as we get home, we're gonna figure out how to do that. How does that work in Wisconsin? So when we got home back here to Wisconsin in 2022, we got in our first utility rate case with We Energies, where we were, Walnut Way as a legal intervener, participating in that case to address the affordability issue. Over the course of what now is more than 100 years, there had never been a community-based organization to step into the ring and be an intervener in these sort of rate cases on the issue of affordability. So it was a huge first for Milwaukee, a huge first for the organization, and now, which is really just the beginning of a long journey of something that has existed for more than 100 years, to see us in it in our infancy, basically, the first 3, 4, 5 years of this work. So we understand that this is a huge learning journey for us, overall. So that's a little bit about us. And as shared, I grew up in the neighborhood, Milwaukee, and I always wanted to be part of the change and all of that kind of stuff. And so the opportunity to be at Walnut Way was, I don't know, how the stars sort of align on your journey, and that's what happened for me. So I started out what you might imagine for the neighborhood kid story: Boys and Girls Club, foster care recruitment, adult learning. So, and then the further I got, the more I felt like things were about economics. So I started to figure out and think about who could I work with that was doing social enterprise work. So some of you all may be familiar with Sheriff Southeastern Wisconsin that used to exist. It was a food buying club. So some of y'all might be familiar with the mobile market. It's one of the first, before Pick and Save's mobile market. It's taking food to food deserts across the community. That's one of the projects that I was able to spearhead while I was at Share. And then from Share, adult learning, different things like that. But then I also became the director of the Fondy Farmers Market. the oldest farmers market in Milwaukee. And while I was over there, I learned more about operations and all of that kind of stuff. So anyway, while I was there, I got invited to be on the board at Walnut Way. And when I got on the board at Walnut Way, a year or so, I became the treasurer. By 2016, they was like, just take the job. So that's the back end. But my talk today about the affordability piece is try to do it in 4 parts. So we did the first part about Walnut Way. The second part is the main things that we see the problems are, and David and Tom did an excellent job of that overall. So my talk will probably be mostly overlap and a lot of nuance. And then the third one would be, for us similarly, what are some of these drivers behind this, some of the things that we've been talking about and heard. And then fourth, what can we do, and what are we doing to address that overall? So the top 3 for us in terms of what are the main issues is, and it's been mentioned already, number 1 is who's gonna bear the environmental and infrastructure burden of all of this? To that question, who's really gonna pay for all of this? It is our belief that the utilities, the companies that are behind the data centers, that they should cover all of these costs, and that we should drive up public participation to ensure that that really happens. That's our top line, goal when we think about that. Number 2 is just economic displacement. So we heard a little bit about Port Washington, but what we didn't hear is that property taxes could go up behind that and essentially displace a lot of folks, in smaller communities when such a large entity or a large initiative comes in to take over. And the last one is just as far as big issues is just the lack of democratic process, just being able to really have true public participation. Like recently, the Oak Creek plan, first step has been approved, and Tom was talking about the tariffs are next. We had such strong participation, they had to extend the comment periods, but that didn't change the commission's decision in terms of choosing, with the utility in that matter. So the whole process and, the real teeth in regulation as it exists is really important. So we know the drivers are basically cloud computing and AI. And so the economic forces obviously are much stronger than any of the communities that's actually dealing with the economic forces. So only tool we really have is, right, some level of regulation and public process to really do something about all of that. It's very interesting because the dynamics of it are, it's economic opportunity. Who would be against economic opportunity? And so when we go back and say bearing the burden, someone talked about water earlier. We could also talk about air as it relates to this, air quality, and a number of other things. So who's really bearing those burdens in terms of the cost of making that happen? And so what we've seen so far is what we would expect. Unions being pitted against, citizens, just in terms of the wherewithal and how far should we go in this process around data centers, because unions want jobs, unions want to create workforce and opportunity. But in a situation like this, we have to measure the risk. And without a really open discourse and a lot of public involvement, a lot of these things sort of get lost in the process, and you have people more or less pitted against each other. So at Oak Creek, what we saw at the public hearings was we saw a lot of union representation come out and really speak up on behalf of the unions, which is important. And when we think about what would actually take place at that site with Microsoft, it'd probably be about 2,500 jobs created for construction. So 2,500 jobs for construction for 3 years. But as Tom was saying, these data centers could or expected to last decades, but it's only 50 real jobs, going forward. So all of that sort of nuance just really isn't being lifted up in a way where people can, speak to it and basically weigh in and, have a way of making sure that there is real community benefit around all of these opportunities as they exist. But there are pitfalls, obviously, and we know that based on what David shared, because the need outsizes the land that's available, the population, the number of houses, it's just really outsized. And so there's nothing we would do in our individual households that would be that extreme. And we would move forward consciously feeling like it was a good choice. And so that's what this whole process is about in terms of our work, working with CUB, working with folks like yourselves to just increase public participation, increase, community knowledge about the issues so that, the 2 out of 10 people that do show up, right? That's more than the 1 in the past, or if you will. And that's important. Because when we talk about affordability, what we really know is who has disposable time and income to really participate in a process that takes all this energy, takes all this knowledge, and is not really set up in a way for public participation to be great. And that challenge for us is the work. So we'll knock on a door and say, hey, you hear about that gas plant? And somebody will say, I'm just trying to feed my kids. We've all heard these stories. And so that's what it's like. But nevertheless, you stay in the work, you continue the work, and you always find that one or inspired by the next, and you continue to bring people into the fold. I didn't know Tom 2 years ago. Now Tom is somebody I call all the time to learn more about this, and now I'll be calling David. Seriously, and then when people challenge what I do or don't know, I call Tom and David, and we all meet at the same place. And then we make sure that the truth is being sought out. Not Tom is wrong or David is right, but just that the truth is being sought out. That's really what our work is in terms of facilitating through all of that. And it's fun sometimes, but a lot of times it's not fun, primarily because of the corporate capture, of the legislature, essentially. And so the revolving door of the commissioners taking the seat and then going to work for the utility or different things like that take place all around the country, it is frustrating, it is challenging. And so what we try to focus on is staying in the game, right? Because if you use all your resources, if you come out mad and fighting everybody, you're just gonna burn yourself out. So if this has been going on for 100 years, how do we stay in this, in a way that reflects our commitment, that reflects what we're learning and all of that kind of stuff going forward? So we have people in the fold who are, revolutionaries. They really do want to do something about everything, but we do have to balance all of that out at the same time. Just in terms, I got a couple more little things, just a couple more. Real quick, the tax incentives that are being provided to data centers is a big crux of the issue. And so from a legislative standpoint, being able to address that would be huge, because some of the things that you can do in Wisconsin, you can't do in other states, which make us really vulnerable around this issue. So the tax incentives are a really big problem in terms of what has to be addressed. The property speculation. You got developers showing up in all sorts of places speculating on property. And so if the leverage or if the leverage at the municipal level or the state level is there, you can have these things moving without no oversight, without no public participation. And so that becomes a real big problem, because if you're not aware of something happening, and then you're impacted by it later, the only natural thing you feel is left out in that whole process. And so what the work that CUB does, what I'm learning from what David shared, is how do we get in front of the work and apply the pressure now, both to the Public Service Commission, also to the governor, honestly, because he appoints the commissioners, and then to our legislators. Lastly, I just add on the end of this that there should be something like a data center accountability board, right? So you push the legislature to create something like that, where we have some oversight, some regulation is taking place, some rigor is happening in the process, and so we're not just being bamboozled by economic development overall. And then the IRP piece is essential. We see that in other states, And we think that that would be a huge component, but we know it's a lot of resistance against that. I'll just wrap up by saying again, I appreciate the opportunity, looking forward to doing this again with Tom and David, but I just think that, I just really believe that, you know, this is a situation where it's really challenging to figure out, because when we were at Oak Creek, we had the numbers. They extended the date for the hearings. We did everything we thought we were supposed to do, but we didn't get the outcome we were looking for. Can you all imagine how much money was invested in driving the effort to end up not having the outcome that you would expect when you have actual public participation, especially in a sort of smaller suburban area? So that was a huge loss, you know, in our reality. That don't mean we give up, but it means that, you know, we don't quite understand the problem or the nature of the problem or how to address it. And so that's why we continue to stay in the work to figure that out. Even though it does really feel like, you know, just to be honest with you, it can feel like a losing battle completely, because you're doing everything civically that you believe you've been taught to do, but you're not getting the outcome that you're looking for. And so it will take more of us to be involved. And as you shared with me earlier, there's no way we can do this unless we do it together.
Wisconsin organization, which has been advocating for energy justice for the past years, and I'm not saying year, but years. Amanda has a master's in public health and epidemiology from the University of Michigan, so she's got something to offer through the city, and I look forward to her comments. Go ahead.
Thanks. Yes, I'm here mostly as a member of Healthy Climate Wisconsin, which actually as an organization was an intervener in the Oak Creek power plant case. And I've been working with that team for the last year to organize and turn out health professionals to start talking about the health impacts of gas and power plants, as well as climate change, to really try and shift that narrative. We know we're hearing a lot about the cost and affordability, and that's very important, but also what's really important to a lot of people is their own health, their kids' health, their community's health. And so we think that talking more about the health impacts of some of these decisions can be really a transformative narrative to help shift and build our power to create healthier environments and stop some of these harmful power plants from happening. So I'm going to talk kind of about 3 different pathways how gas and energy burden are related to our health. First being that higher energy bills increases energy insecurity, which leads to poor health outcomes. The next is that the air and water pollution from these gas plants and these power generation themselves harms every body system that we have and has a lot of really negative health impacts. And then the third being that long-term piece about these power plants and reliance on gas contributes to climate change, which is a massive health risk to every piece of the system. So first, focusing on energy insecurity is bad for our health. So we heard a lot about affordability of energy. Energy, regardless of your health conditions, access to energy is a basic human need, especially on a day like today when it's 93 plus degrees outside. Our human body can only exist in a really narrow system that is comfortable for us before we start feeling those impacts. And so it's really important that we have access to air conditioning or to water or to the power that we need to keep our bodies safe. And so energy burden as such is a really key social determinant of health. Some analyses found that energy burden was so influential on early death that only race and education had stronger influences. So this is a really important connection to health, and we're not talking about it that much. And so I want to start getting people talking about it a bit more. We recognize that communities of color, low income, and rural communities are the most burdened by energy burden. In Milwaukee, the energy burden of Black and Latino neighborhoods is more than double that of white neighborhoods. And climate change is worsening this problem. So as the planet gets hotter, we rely on more energy to keep our homes and our our locations cool to keep our bodies safe, and days of extreme heat are increasing because of this. So this is a really busy figure, and we can take some time to look at it later if you're interested in diving deeper, but I just really wanted to show the overall pathway. So some of those structural factors that we see, racial segregation, barriers in accessing energy assistance and healthcare, intersect with those economic factors and ability to pay for energy costs, which create unsafe conditions like utility shutoffs, exposure to extreme temperatures, that lead people to develop like coping factors of making decisions and trade-offs about, I'm not going to turn my heat on, or I'm going to use my oven to heat my house because I don't have access to a stable energy source, which then exposes them to that harmful gas in their house, which affects your lungs, which leads to those health impacts. So heat-related illnesses, chronic stress and mental health, and a whole variety of health impacts. So specifically on heat, recognizing we're in summer and the temperature today, there are some populations that are at particularly high risk of poor health outcomes, especially during heat waves. So folks with dementia, schizophrenia, asthma, multiple sclerosis, coronary disease, or kidney failure might be on certain medications that can reduce the body's ability to like sweat or produce water that then that affects your cooling system, can then lead to more negative health impacts. So you want to, if you have any of these conditions, consult your health professional and your doctor to talk about how you can develop a plan to deal with that heat stress, and to make sure that you can get to a location that is cooler, that you have access to sufficient water to help cool your body down, and come up with a plan. And I also encourage you to check on your neighbors, especially if you know folks that are older that live nearby you. Check on them and make sure that they have a plan to deal with the stress on especially hot days. So then shifting around to those coal and gas-fired power plants, these are bad for your health for many reasons. So there's a handout over there that explains this a little more in depth, but I just want to point out, you can see the whole body, the air and water pollution from gas can get it creates these tiny particles that can get into your lungs and affect your whole body systemically, which can lead to COPD and lung diseases, as well as heart disease and different respiratory infections. And they can also intersect with your hormones and create different hormone disruptions, which impact and can create a whole variety of different health conditions. So really the point of this is that the water and air pollution from these plants intersects with your whole body, and so is generally bad for health in a lot of different ways. Then in the long-term sense, that reliance on greenhouse gases exacerbates climate change. So we know these plants create carbon emissions, we've talked about that already, and this is bad for our health in all kinds of systemic ways. So the climate change creates different health risks and hazards, like extreme weather events, like high heat today, like we just talked about, as well as reduced global food production, because that impacts the systems and what can grow in different temperatures. It also creates higher levels of air pollution and days of poor air quality or wildfire risk, which then intersect with different vulnerability factors, as well as the exposure and the systems that we develop to cope with and protect ourselves from these risks, which then create, like we talked about, heat-related illness and respiratory illnesses, as well as changing the intersection of people with different animals, which can lead to infectious diseases. And we see malaria and yellow fever happening in areas where those diseases didn't used to exist, or create more intersections with malnutrition and foodborne diseases as well. And so this, really, again, the point of this is that climate change impacts the whole body and everyone's health in a lot of different ways. And as such, it's really important that when opportunities come up, like fighting against the development of a new gas plant that is going to exacerbate climate change, that we speak up and talk about how this will impact our health. And if we want to protect our community's health, one of the best things we can do is get engaged in advocating for climate solutions. And as such, just a quick note, so at Healthy Climate Wisconsin, we are a group of nurses, doctors, public health workers, and different health professionals all across the state that are united to advocate for climate change and talk really about the detrimental health impacts of climate change. And as such, we are committed to communicating that the global climate crisis is a public health emergency. And many of the solutions to climate change are also really good for our health. So investing in electric vehicles is also better for our health. Investing in more public transportation gets people more active, which is also better for our health. And as such, it's really important to continue talking about it. So if you're interested in joining us, please see me afterwards, or you can check out the Healthy Climate Wisconsin's website to learn more.